So you're steep against packages that you care about, and T the tool will help you to identify those because it knows what you or your company or the team you work with are using, like the entire stack,
Right.
because we underpin all that. So you stake against packages that you care about, and there'll be incentives for staking against packages that are less staked against. And then every epoch will generate some currency, and you'll get some as someone who is staking, and the rest will go to the things you're staking against, and then to their dependencies, and their dependencies, and their dependencies, all the way down a
Nice.
percentage each time. So the more important you are in the stack, the less you're getting because you're deeper, but the more you're getting because you're more of a dependency.
Welcome to Mission DeFi with Brad Nickel, where we explore projects in decentralized finance that are innovating and driving our mission of financial freedom forward. Thank you for listening. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, and review Mission DeFi and spread the word by posting a tweet to the show. All opinions expressed by Brad Nickel or his guests are their opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Black Knox, Material Indicators, or any other affiliated organizations. You should not treat any opinion expressed by Brad Nickel or his guests as an inducement to make a particular investment, follow a particular strategy, or become involved with any project. A project being featured on the show is not an endorsement of that project in any way. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Now, here's Mission DeFi with Brad Nickel.
I fell back on programming because it was a hobby that I'd been doing for a long time, but just as a hobby. I used to make like little games when I was a kid and teenager, toys mostly, little tools here and there. I made like this clock for Windows that when you clicked it, it would move because no one had invented the idea of having a clock in the bottom corner of the screen at that point.
Nice.
Which took me ages. Like Win32 was such a terrible API. I don't know if you've got any experience with that at all, but
I have no experience coding in Windows. I have a primitive experience coding in other environments, but I do not have a ton. But I do remember how difficult the devs I worked with, how much difficulty they had.
yeah, like it was like I'm glad it's gone. They were designing for a different era where like the amount of symbols in the dynamic library was very important. So they rammed like huge amounts of functionality into the same function. And so if you pass different parameters to different indices in the parameter list, it would behave completely differently. And usually you'd have to call the same function like 3 or 4 times. Like the first time to initialize a data structure that you would pass it, and it would then do whatever it did. It was like so many black boxes, and of course this was before the internet, so figuring out how to actually do this stuff was incredibly difficult. Anyway, so that's an aside. So I was depressed about chemistry, and I fell back on programming, and I installed Linux, and I got involved in open source. So my way into programming was open source from the start, and
Nice.
so I moved back in with my parents and began somewhat of an incel lifestyle, basically. But I worked on a bunch of different apps for Linux, and some of them were good and got attention. And I managed to get myself a job at a startup in London as a result, because they used some of the things I built, and they saw that I was using the same toolkits they were. And they were an open source focused company. So it was there I got myself into the industry, and a couple of years after I started there, I was lead developer for their apps. They made an app for Windows, Linux, Mac, Android, iPhone, and BlackBerry, which did have an app store for a bit. And the process of using all the different open source libraries we used, all the different build systems across all the different platforms, was infuriating. I reckon we wasted like 30-40% of our time just pissing about with the build system crap that you had to in order to make anything work. So
Yep.
that was the inspiration for Brew. Essentially, I wanted to build a package manager that was more hackable, more focused on developers and what developers needed, rather than being what I felt most patch managers at the time were, which was like a set of very restrictive black boxes that were designed for system admins and for people like putting up computers across the internet, but not in a. And well, so I started building that, and after a few months, I open sourced it because I realized it was cool, and I managed to get some attention from some people who were influential on Twitter at the time. One guy from Ruby on Rails, and Brew was written in Ruby, so I made a number of really good decisions that led to its success, essentially. And after about 9 months, it was doing so well that I quit the job I had to work on it full time.
Nice. So you're saying that because you built it in Ruby, it got attention because people in the Ruby community would promote it and talk about it. That helped?
Yeah, totally. Because at the time, like, totally different world. This was 14 years ago. Ruby was becoming very popular because of Ruby on Rails, because of 37 signals. And the Mac came with Ruby. So I'd seen that popularity, and I was interested in the language. So I was like, well, if I build Homebrew with Ruby, then like I get to learn Ruby, and it'll be very easy for people to install Homebrew because it comes with the Mac. You don't have to like piss about with an installer or build it. There's no complicated build steps.
Right.
And open source at the time was vastly more complex than it is now. Just experimenting with a new package that you found was usually something where you had to like set aside a few hours in your evening and cross your fingers that it was going to work. So it was very important to me that it was extremely easy for people to get going. So yeah, decisions like that.
So Max, you switched from a regular day job to doing this full time. Was there revenue enticement to do that, or was it just a more fun project, or you had to pick where you were going to spend your life?
Yeah, well, certainly no revenue inducement for it. I was young. I didn't really care about the money. I had like a few £1,000s saved up in my bank, and working on Homebrew was way awesome. Like, I enjoyed the job I had. It was a cool Web2 startup. It was music focused. Last Fem, it was called. I love the people there, but suddenly I managed to build something which was getting like global attention. I could feel that I'm making something that was going to be enormous if I put the time in.
Right.
And so it was easy for me to decide to do that. Like I think I've always been the one where I don't mind going up to zero on my bank account, and well, I did many times.
I know what you mean. Well, it's funny because I'm not a developer, would never call myself that, but I am a software junkie, and I love open source and always have been using it for a very long time. And as someone that's not a developer and someone that wasn't a Linux expert, I used Linux, I played with it, etc. For me, finding Homebrew was a lifesaver because I would go to try out a new open source package, and I now not only had to learn how to deal with that application, whatever it was I wanted to use, but I also had to figure out how to use all and install and manage and deal with all the dependencies, right? And so from the perspective of kind of the non-targeted use case, it was a real lifesaver for me because I knew that for the most part, if I used Brew to install an application, I wasn't going to have to go through 5 hours of trying to figure out everything else that went along with it. And so, there was a use case for junkies like me that wanted to play with everything that came out, just to make my life simpler and easier. So, and I'm sure for developers, it was a dream as well.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to build, was something that allowed you to explore like all the fruits of open source without it being a pain in the butt. And I kind of felt like I was in a unique position to do that as well. Like the work I'd been doing in open source, I was so obsessed with all the users of our apps that couldn't use them because they got somewhere in the build instructions and it was failing. And it made me realize how fragile the entire ecosystem was. Like there's so many ways to break your shit. And so I wanted to build something that made it so you could still experiment, but a lot of that environment management that goes into making sure these packages install correctly was handled for you in a nice way. And basically, I did succeed with that, which was satisfying, really. Like ultimately, I'm like you. I want to be able to have fun with my computer.
Exactly. What was the timing on the launch of Brew?
It was the first commit was May 17th,
Uh,
2009.
oh wow. Okay.
And then I didn't open source it until later that year. I'm not entirely sure when. And then it immediately got a reasonable amount of attention. Well, not immediately, but after a few months. And then
Right.
over the next year, it became the biggest project on GitHub by far. Like
Nice.
GitHub was pretty new at that point. And that was another thing going in the favor of Homebrew, right? So GitHub figured out how to make open source collaboration just that much better. Like, small little details that they put into their product made 100% difference in how easy it was for people to collaborate on
Right.
things
Max,
together.
what was it like for you to get projects to work with a different new package manager? Were you able to leverage the libraries that were already out there, or did people actually have to go jump to a bunch of hoops to move things over into the keg universe?
Yeah. So, this is a difficult question to answer. People hate new tools. That's always the way of things because they don't want to unlearn what they've learned, and so you need to really get a bunch of pain points right for them to switch. But Homebrew was probably the first project to really tap into GitHub's virality for how contribution can work. And I was quite clever in the way that I built Homebrew so that you could clone Homebrew, and that was a working installation. There was nothing more that needed to be done. And
Nice.
as a result, you could edit the package formula, the recipes, in that checkout, and then commit and push. So the steps required to actually contribute to Homebrew were as minimal as they could be. Tea is actually slightly more tricky, but I realized there was good reasons for that over the years. But it's still a lot easier than most open source projects are. Like, I think this is an issue with open source in general, is that often they don't explain to people who might be interested in participating in joining that community, like how to actually do that.
Yep.
And
Yeah. No. Climbing through docs is a nightmare at times. Yeah.
yeah, it
Ab-
should be intuitive, easy, and like as simple as possible. You're losing potential contribution every time there's a step removed.
Yep.
I
Yep.
think a lot of open source projects fail because of that,
Well,
rather than because they don't get enough traction.
and then there are assumptions about the dependencies that they think people will already understand and know. And I assume this is true for developers and non-developers that also throws them off. So again, a good justification for it. So you've released Tea this year, and tell me kind of what inspired you to try to take this to a different, not a completely different direction, but definitely a different direction in terms of interaction, potential user interface, user interactions, user experience, both graphical and command line. Give us kind of the genesis of Tea, if you could.
Yeah, sure. So, I worked on Homebrew for years, and I was a dictator on that project. Quite literally, like I modeled myself after Linus, because
Nice.
what's the most successful open sourse project of all time? Well,
There you go.
the Linux kernel. And so I'd seen big projects when I got involved in open source initially flail around and make bad calls and make bad products and bad software and be not particularly successful. It's been the year of the Linux desktop for 20 years, right? Every
Right.
year is going to be the year of the Linux desktop. Why do they fail? Because they don't have a good leader. none of these projects have a good leader, in my opinion.
Right.
Don't think the Linux kernel would exist if Linus hadn't been the man he is. As much of a dick he is, like you have to rule these projects, and so I ruled Homebrew as a dick. Quite honestly, I wasn't very nice, and I got a bad rep on the internet as a result of it. And it was necessary to get it to where it got, because those first 3 or 4 years were essential for guiding it to what it became, and then I could pass it to the community, and I did, because honestly, I was a bit burned out.
Well, being a dick can be exhausting.
Yeah, it's true. Honestly, I don't like being mean. It takes me hours to get over it, but ultimately, I'm obsessed with quality.
Yeah.
And so I give the people I work with a hard time a lot of the time, because I want things to be as good as they can be. Maybe one of these years I'll figure out how to stop being like that.
Well, there's a lot of companies that have been incredibly successful because of those kinds of attitudes. Apple and Steve Jobs, and Amazon, Jeff Bezos. It seems to be a theme amongst some successful projects.
Yes, I fear it's necessary, but it's not nice.
Okay, so
but
so
I wasn't that bad. I wasn't jobs quality or anything.
Oh, that's good.
So yeah, like I burned out, and also like it was done. I knew it was done. It was time to hand it over to the community, and so I think it was 2015 when I pushed the button and moved it off my username onto the Homebrew organization. I was at a Christmas party in Chicago, and it was at this boot camp that I was teaching at, and I was teaching there because they allowed me to do half time. So I got paid to do half time teaching, and then I spent the other half of my time working on open source.
Nice. That's a good gig.
Yeah, like it's what I've been like my whole career. I've been looking for ways to only work on open source because it's way more fun and way more impactful. And I showed my boss at the time the page where I could move Homebrew off my username onto the Homebrew organization. I said, should I do it? And he said, Max, fuck no. And it was about 5-10 minutes after that I realized that I had to, precisely for like his reaction, right? Because he was like, you don't want to lose this project. It's the biggest project on GitHub. It's on your username. Like, there's so much opportunity in this for you. And I knew that Homebrew was not about me. It was about what it had become as a project and how important it was to the world and to the people who used it and its community.
Right.
So he helped me indirectly. But he certainly expressed like why I was having trouble doing it. So yeah, like about 2015, I started working on it full time. But in the years after that, I never stopped thinking about what I would do to Brew if I could do it again. What things could a package manager be? Because I realized that the package manager is like the base of every dev stack. There's enormous potential and power there that like no package manager seemingly has, even Brew. Like I was quite pleased with Brew, but really like I didn't push any boundaries significantly. They're still just installed and updated packages.
Right.
Didn't do anything particularly different to all the others. Like since the first package manager, which I think was Slackware's package manager, like back in the 90s. Like the first person who realized that we needed some software to manage this shit because it had become too complicated. Because open source is like this tower of dependencies, and every year we add more and more things to that tower, to that stack, and things never get removed.
Right.
Because they work, and we want to build new things. We don't want to fix the old things. That's why OpenSSL is still so huge, even though every month there's a security exploit.
Because having to get something else or build something else is too much work.
Yeah. That's the truth. And why is that? Well, it's because of the nature of open source, right? It's free.
Yeah, exactly.
Because nobody is really encouraged to work on it, you have to have a full-time job, and you have to work on your evenings and weekends if you care about your open source. And I've done that so many times. So I spent years looking for solutions so that I could work on open source. I had a Patreon for a bit. I couldn't get it above $800, and I felt like I was begging. I really felt like I was begging for people's support, and that feels bad. But also, like, I was spending 30-40% of my time doing that, right? Trying to get these donations so that I could work on open source. And I tried like a newsletter, and I tried like a few other things, and I just could never get the kind of support I needed. And you know, even now I've got GitHub sponsors still, but I get, I think, $7 a month.
So that was part of the motivation for Tea as well, right? Is that you wanted to build it differently, all the things you've been thinking of, but you also wanted to build in a model for helping developers. But go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead back to kind of you thought that you had some better ways to do things. What was some of that was kind of germinating for you over that time?
Yeah, well, you know, I think we can talk about that in a bit. Like, I was leading up to, you know, I kept making notes about what could a package manager be. And over the years, I came up with some pretty cool stuff, but I still didn't have the incentive. I felt like people would ask me every now and again, "Are you gonna make another brew?" Because, you know, let's face it, it's a little stagnant. Like, I still know the core maintainer, Mike McQuaid, who was a friend I had from way back when I got into open source initially. We both worked on KDE together.
Wow.
And he contacted me pretty early on after Homebrew got on Hack and News for like the fourth time in a week. And he asked if permission to join. I was like, well, it's an open source project. Just contribute.
Yeah, exactly.
But you know, we were both British, so we both had these sort of these manners that needed to be adhered to. And he still runs the project. Overall, like, he's almost certainly done more time and more dedication to it than me. But he's not the same kind of guy as me. He doesn't invent, and he doesn't create new things. He maintains.
Sure.
And so, you know, people ask if I would do it again. I'll be like, nah, I don't see the point. But it was about 18 months ago where I had a friend who was always trying to get me into crypto stuff, always trying to get me into Web3. Way back when Ethereum had just launched, he's like, "Hey Max, you can do smart contract dev for $500 an hour." Even that didn't really appeal to me because I've never been truly motivated by the money. You know,
Right.
I'm not an idiot. I want enough money so that I can live my life, and it would be great to have enough money so I could just work on open source full time. But it's not the motivation. I want to make cool stuff. And so I was like, well, okay, like, I think Bitcoin is very impressive. I've read the white paper, but I don't see why it interests me. But I was in between things. I didn't want to have to get another contract again, so I started looking into it. And it was while I was messing around with NFTs on OpenSea that I saw that 10% smart contract that directs 10% of the money you pay for an NFT to the original creator.
Right.
And I saw how you can use smart contracts to do interesting things with that currency that you couldn't really do with traditional banking. You couldn't force it, not without a lawyer, not without
Right.
hiring someone to enforce that, without an entire legal system to make sure that people obey those contracts. It just happens automatically. And I had this moment of inspiration where I suddenly saw the entire package graph of a package manager and how all these little dependency diagrams and the graph of all that dependency information could be remunerated if you could just get some token into the top of that graph. It would just filter all the way down through all of it, helping every package that needs help to be maintained. And suddenly I had a reason to build a successor to Brew. I had all these great ideas for what a new Brew could be, and I had a compelling new feature that made it to me so that I could see how I could sell this to people. Because it's hard. It's hard to sell a replacement for something. It's much easier to sell something that is new, that solves new pain points. But this, and you know, people get behind that message. They see how what we're doing with crypto is different. to most of the other projects out there.
Well, and aligning incentives is always a powerful model for getting people to make changes, right? So I think that makes complete sense to think of a way to set up and reward people.
Yeah, like honestly, I think we really nailed this. Like we're at the point where we're gearing up to build out the test net, and I have some amazing people at T who really are like uh, years of experience in this area, like with the tokenomics, with understanding blockchain technology, understanding which blockchains make sense for what we're doing. And we've designed such an incredible system. I just can't see how it's going to fail at this point.
That's awesome. What chain are you guys building that on?
I'll be able to tell you next week. We've got it down to 3 candidates.
All right.
Not gonna
Are they
spoil
of
it.
a particular genre?
Yes. Well, at this point, it's almost certainly Ethereum based. So
Okay.
it'll be layer 2, layer 3.
Oh, I was gonna pitch Canto to you because I'm working on their biz dev group, and I think their ethos supports this nicely. But I won't put any pressure on you. Okay, so can you kind of explain to us kind of where you guys are with kind of the model of how developers will earn for maintaining and updating, and I'm assuming there's a model for how getting people to put packages in. What are you guys kind of thinking about how that's going to function?
Yeah, so it's a proof of stake system. Well, you know, people will be staking, although we call it steeping, against.
I love it. That's a dad joke appeal. I love that. That's awesome. Go ahead.
Well, it's not exactly staking, so it works to use its own word. But like Brew was famous for his terminology, and I wanted some of that with T, although a little less. So you're steep against packages that you care about, and T, the tool, will help you to identify those because it knows what you or your company or the team you work with are using, like the entire stack,
Right.
because we underpin all that. So you stake against packages that you care about, and there'll be incentives for staking against packages that are less staked against. And then every epoch will generate some currency, and you'll get some as someone who is staking, and the rest will go to the things you're staking against, and then to their dependencies, and their dependencies, and their dependencies, all the way down a percentage each time. So the more important you are in the stack, the less you're getting because you're deeper, but the more you're getting because you're more of a dependency.
Right. So because there'll be more projects that use you, and so you'll be getting a flow from all of those projects, even though you're further down the stack.
Exactly. Like the open source projects that are the most important, that keep the internet running, keep all software running. They're the ones that have the most dependence. And this is the kind of information you can't fake, right?
Right.
You can't pretend that you're an important package. Other people have to choose that you're an important package. They've made that decision.
Yeah.
And people are staking against the packages that have made those decisions. And then their dependents have made those decisions again. So it's a kind of page rank. And so we've actually heavily dipped into Google's page rank, their academic paper on the topic, and adapted it to what we're doing to make sure that the way the token rewards are split is like you can't spam it and you can't game it, but also that the rewards go to the right places. And we don't want to give too much to some people and not enough to others.
Sure.
So we're being very careful with the models that we're generating right now to make sure that I want people to be able to make a good living off of their open source. I want it to be possible for people to quit their well-paid Web 2 positions and just work in open source. That was the entire point behind this, right?
Yep.
That's why I wanted to build this.
So Max, have you thought about, I mean, all of these projects have some amount of community, whether it's just the GitHub issues list or they have mailing lists or discords or whatever. Have you thought about surfacing that community in some way inside of T where perhaps there can be community contributions besides just the mechanism, maybe a reputation piece on top of this where the uh, usage sometimes is not necessarily the only indicator of the value of a project. It might be a really critical utility, and I'll give you an example. I use Carbon Copy Cloner sometimes to get myself out of a world of hurt when a hard drive crashes, and it might be once every 3 years that I do it. But when I do it, it's worth a lot to me. And so there's projects that aren't necessarily gauged in their value by the frequency of usage, but maybe some other measure. Do you have a mechanism that can accommodate that?
Yeah, so we've given it a lot of thought. So things like that are still what we call apps. They're apps in the graph. So they're the top of the stack. They're not dependencies. They don't have any dependence. And stuff like that will need to be steeped against. We will encourage people to steep against things that aren't being steeped against, giving them better rewards. But ultimately, it'll be up to you to make sure that you're using T to tell you what you need to be steeping against. Like maybe you use that like very rarely, but you should have it installed so T is telling you that you need to be steeping your token against it. Because your incentive to steep is that you're getting rewards, as well as participating in acknowledging the true value of open source. Also, we're hoping what will happen is that companies will steep extra. We're heavily investigating right now the opportunity to make it so that companies can like declare this as a charitable donation.
Ah, nice.
So they can get that tax write-off for that. And then they stick it in the graph and steep against everything that they have used. And so like, packages like that, it will also be in their interest to appeal to their communities. Now, when we go live, we're going to have on the testnet a website you can go to that tells you as the package maintainer how much T token you would be earning. We're hoping this will incentivize people to onboard to the protocol.
Yeah, that's great.
So you can go there and see what it will be, but then if it's not enough because your app, then what you need to start doing is energizing your community, getting them to participate, getting them to make Microsoft feel bad because Microsoft uses it, but they're not steeping against it. And this is transparent, right? It's blockchain, so everyone will be able to see where all these contributions are coming from. And if these companies that make a lot of money off this open source aren't actually putting their money where their mouth is.
Yeah, that's really interesting too, because you'll have companies come in asking the maintainers to help them out with something, or they'll try to hire them for consulting or whatever. So they'll have an idea of who's using these things anyway. But the beauty of it is that public pressure on these companies to participate in the steeping makes a ton of sense. I love that model, and it gives the incentive to the projects themselves to work a bit harder on communications and community building and engagement, right? Because now you really want people to stay engaged, involved, using it, updating it, whatever, so that it provides more rewards back and gives you an opportunity to tell them, hey, please steep against our project so that we can earn more and keep this thing going. And I think that's an easier ask because if you're steeping, you are earning as well than just, hey, would you contribute money to our project, right?
Yeah, totally. Like you're mutually invested.
What will the
Exactly
conditions be on that steeping? Is there a lockup period? Is it how liquid is the steeped asset?
Yeah, it's going to be a lockout period. My people are still figuring out the exact details. So we're going to have a yellow paper written, around the same time the testnet comes out, which has all the details. But, it's complicated. I kind of feel that we're building one of the more complicated systems that has been built on blockchain, but it's so important that we get it right. Otherwise,
absolutely.
So that makes me, I want to ask a couple of propeller head questions that I'm sure you know the answer to, but I'm just curious. So with Homebrew as as the predecessor of this, how much of the under the hood infrastructure is leveraged for that? I mean, package manager's got a repository somewhere and an index of packages and a bunch of metadata and the dependency trees and all of that stuff. Is that similar to what you guys did in Homebrew, or is it re-rolled from scratch?
Yeah, like I took the learnings that I had from Homebrew for sure. Tea and Brew have some fundamental dissimilarities. Like Tea avoids installing anything in a global prefix. That means it's not installed onto your computer in a way that could damage it. Is the main thing.
So it's
Uh,
it's like user level installs.
Yeah, it's user level. Every package in T is relocatable, which is another thing I learned to do because, there's a problem with Homebrew. It's a problem with every package manager, honestly. There's a lot more flexibility when things are relocatable. But we
Sure.
install them into the home directory.t is the directory. And it's all under there. It's not like available in user local or anything. And then we
Yeah,
have what we
and
call,
that's not unlike what other platforms. NPM does that, for
oh yeah,
instance, with Node or whatever. So from an operational infrastructure perspective, as a open source project, do you guys have a lot of uh, centralized assets that you have to manage, or are you encouraging people to mirror the repos? How's that going to work? Is there a crypto incentive for people to do it, participate at that level?
well, certainly we want all our assets to be decentralized. And I thought we would be there by now, but the truth is centralization is easier and we're concentrating on different aspects of what we're doing with the product right now. But making it so all the packages are in IPFS or some other decentralized storage mechanism is absolutely a priority because, we want this to be the package manager that beats all the others, that you can rely on, this is immutable and robust and won't go down. Like, to a certain extent, we already proved that because when GitHub went down the other day, you couldn't use Brew, but you could use Tea. We're more decentralized than Brew is at this point. I mean, let's face it, Brew is all on GitHub, and a lot of the people who work on Brew full time work at GitHub, and Microsoft own that.
So I have a couple of sort of hypothetical questions to ask. They're extremely self-serving, and Brad will probably kick me under the table as I ask them. But the presentation and the user experience of T, where I've got this catalog of apps, there's obviously the opportunity to present a lot of data in the context of the application, the rationale for why would I install this, how do I do it, how does it work, links to the documentation. It's a wonderful alternative to, Brew install, and I have no idea what it's going to do when I click that button, other than it's going to go pull down a bunch of stuff. It's a great user experience. It seems, it's fundamentally, in its current incarnation, at least this is the way I've played with it, focused on installing OS system level native code style applications that are substrate to other projects, plus applications on top of that. If hypothetically you had a system that had a requirement for an app store like interface, but they weren't necessarily things that were installed at the OS level, pick a platform that has a 4GL, and I don't know, it doesn't matter. It can be something like Salesforce or Oracle 4GL or any number of other runtime environments where they're self-contained, Roblox, whatever. And I wanted to present installable componentry. Is there any path in the T roadmap that would allow for things at that level, basically subcomponents of another platform, to be managed and installed as well?
Yeah.
Or maybe like a private white label version
Yep.
of this that you might.
Yeah. So you identified one of our future features that we want to add for sure. Like you're talking about the T GUI. So T has a few different incarnations now, and the CLI is the package manager everyone's familiar with. Like, it works on the terminal. And then years ago I realized that package managers were kind of like app stores, and if you presented a package manager in that manner, it could open up all sorts of interesting opportunities. Open source is really rich, like amazingly rich, but it's been locked behind essentially a geeky terminal interface for forever. And so we're trying to change that with the GUI. But yeah, like
Would this work with language focused repos like npm or ruby gems or something like that's more granular than the packages that you currently have in T? Could I envision seeing this on top of Docker Hub, perhaps?
maybe, like I always feel that stuff like brew and tea is special in that you can't get npm without brew or tea. We're this layer beneath, and npm really is a developer package manager that has some neat command line tools in, but it doesn't have um, apps essentially. And so, straight away when we launched TGUI, we were presenting Stable Diffusion Web UI as like one example of what you can do with TGUI that's really tricky in any other capacity.
Yep. And that's actually the reason in the Chuck, before the call, I had actually sent Max some critiques and things I want to see in the platform. And one of the questions I asked him is, you've got all this hype around AI and you've got all these, wannabe users of these platforms. The fact that Stable Diffusion and Auto GPT are one-click installs is huge. I could really see like a subcategory of just all the AI apps that every non-dev or non-technical person would want to install, but would never be able to do. And so I think that's a really exciting tactical market to go after to grow the user base as well.
There are so many of these. I mean, it scales up and down, right? There's programming language level repos of functionality. There are these OS level repos of functionality. It scales all up and down, but it's the same model. Let me present you a catalog of functionality, give you some discovery tools, and in your case, provide a mechanism for monetization. I would really encourage you guys to figure out how to, if you don't want to have it be part of your core project, find out a way to collaborate with forks of this that could go sit on top of the npm repositories or the Ruby gem libraries or some third-party platforms that need app store functionality, because what you guys are doing with the integration between the crypto payment rewards mechanisms and the presentation of the projects and the potential to tie in the community really could scale across the entire stack, from high-level applications all the way down to the tiniest little library that I might include in my source code. It's really pretty sexy in that regard.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I got to say, we already are integrating npm and pip and ruby gems and all the package managers. Like we package everything, and if they have things that make sense to be displayed in like a stored context, then people are welcome to package them up and put them there. Like we accept anything that makes sense. And we're certainly aiming to do like third-party additions to the store. So I call it multi-pantry because the pantry is where you write the package YAML files that describe packages. And I want to open this up so that people can make their own pantries that can be installed into the store. And those can represent storefronts for anything, like a category of open source or an area of open source that requires special treatment. Like one of the first examples I can think of that this makes sense for us is Stable Diffusion's web UI has this extension market, essentially.
Exactly.
Right.
And
exactly what
that
I'm
should
thinking
be, yeah, that should be a first-class denizen of the package page for Stable Diffusion web UI. So if you install Stable Diffusion web UI, its storefront is available to be installed or
yeah, you're just drilling
installed.
down one more level. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think we'll do it.
If I have a custom package inside of T that might not be built for the typical, hey, I'm going to run a shell script behind the scenes to do this install, but needs to get handed off to another application, will you guys have the ability for T to invoke custom installers, or does it need to be in control of the process for all of the dependency management and uninstall and all that stuff?
Yeah, so we're going to add hooks over time. I'm very not interested in having installers. right? This is why we write package managers, because we hate installers. We want to know what those things are doing to our systems. So currently, packages in T are very basic. They're just tarballs that have to be configured in the right way. There's no post-install steps. But one of the things I knew that we should do when I was making my notes about what Brew could do better was cross-package integrations. So this is something I really want to do over time, is that if you have a package foo and a package bar installed, they know that they are better together and that they can enhance each other. And so we'll have hooks in place to make it so that they can do that enhancement in a way that is controllable. So the user knows that their system isn't being destroyed by this thing. And you never know that when you install some software, right?
Right,
Like you
right.
install the Zoom installer, you don't know what it's doing.
Yep.
And it seems to do a lot. I gotta say. And I don't like it. And I don't want it to be doing that stuff.
Yeah, and it's harder to get it out. Well, and I like you and I talked offline about the bundling ideas, and just back kind of to that AI example. One of the things I can see is people that are creating applications in AI and creating LLMs and creating fine tuning mechanisms and everything else, even other kinds of packages related to it, being able to kind of like cross-germinate what they're doing, and being able to allow users to see what's available that's going to work with what they already have. I think that's brilliant. I think that'll be very powerful.
Yeah, I'm really excited about what we can do in the AI space. Just making it so that you can get your models in a way that other packages can use them. So you just depend on Stable Diffusion rather than requiring the user to download it from Hugging Face or making a script that can like Stable Diffusion Web UI downloads it itself, right? I
Right.
don't want it to I want it to be able to depend on the package. And so we're also going to be like packaging up all the AI UIs that exist. Like open source is great because people throw together this awful UI stuff. It's usually awful, and like it's a web UI, and like you have to install packages to make it work. But that's how the genesis of everything that comes after happens. This is where the rapid iteration in open source occurs. Like all these nice apps that come later, they're all inspired by these quick hacky solutions that people throw together. Like AutoGPT is a great example of someone throwing a hacky solution together. It's not nice. You can't download the iPhone app. There isn't a native Mac application for it yet. It was just a bunch of people like rapidly iterating. And I want the T store to be the forefront place where you can experience those things. Now, it might not be for everyone as a result, right? These UIs aren't great, but they're
Right.
there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what it does is it gives more exposure. It drives the developers to create better. It just makes it better all the way around.
Mm-hmm. And of course, once the token's live, there'll be some very interesting consequences for being, in the T ecosystem.
Nice. Well, my next question kind of was, and I don't know if this is sacrilege or not, but a lot of the open source models revolve around kind of almost a freemium model sometimes, where there's this, it's either, install yourself, or you can use it on our servers, or it's install yourself and we have plugins. Is there a model for T later on where there's the ability for the developers to, using the token, to license or sell add-ons or services into projects?
Yeah, almost certainly. Like there's a few ways we can go. Like we're not going to start that way. We're going to be very careful. Open source is too important to be disrupted in a major sense. So, people often ask me if you're going to have to pay for installing Node now, like 0.1 cents or something. And that I knew from the start that we couldn't fundamentally change how open source worked in that manner.
Right.
That's why like the steeping system came to be. We found this way to support open source in a way where it's almost like investing in open source rather than paying directly for it, which fits so well with crypto. But there's so much opportunity for what we can do once that system is engaged. And certainly the idea of using the GUI to make like a subscription system or kind of freemium model for open source is one. I'm a little apprehensive about it. But we have a bunch of DeFi ideas that I think will almost certainly go ahead of that. Like making sure that a project is guaranteeing the security of itself. Like so many open source projects have security exploits that damage industry and the internet and open source itself. And
Right.
so, there could be a kind of futures market where you bet against essentially the security of different open source packages.
Oh,
And
man.
so we think that there's huge opportunities because essentially we're creating an economy around what already has so much value. And then nobody
Right.
has successfully managed to figure out how to actually buoy up that market and make it represent its true value before.
Brad, that freemium piece that you brought up made me think. I mean, I have my early career was an open source shareware project that morphed into a really successful commercial product. And along the way, we had to figure out how to accommodate those people who'd been very supportive in the open source shareware world into the commercial space. And the idea that with a crypto infrastructure under the hood, being able to use things like NFTs to provision access and turn on various features in a product. You get the stock NFT just for steeping on a project, which lets you run it. You pay a little extra, you get these features turned on. I know that starts to delve off into some things that are a bit of the antithesis of some open source projects, but others which do have, and there's lots of projects that have an open source or free component and a for pay and supported commercial version. This might be a really interesting infrastructure if you guys added just one little notch somewhere in there that, hey, and we also issue NFTs that work with these projects to enable features or provide access or give you, a number of transactions or a time period or something. That could be a cool infrastructure that would keep developers from having to reinvent the wheel a million times over.
Yeah, totally. And, I think the way we will handle this initially is, it's EVM compatible. People can build smart contracts to enable this functionality. And
Nice.
we're big into open source, so we hope that the community will come up with great ideas and then try them out and then see which ones win. And almost certainly if there's ones that make a lot of sense for enough open source projects, because every open source project is different, then we will invest in formalizing that to some extent. But yeah, there's so much potential. I'm very excited about what open source will be able to do once we've given them this. And we are giving it to them, right? We're releasing it autonomously on chain and stepping back. Like T Incorporated is not taking any percentage of any of the fees that are being provisioned around the chain. We build our own open source, right? We want to be steeped against ourselves. That's our revenue model.
Love it.
Potentially, we could do something with the T GUI with the store, and so there's revenue opportunity for us there. But the protocol is genuinely a gift to the open source ecosystem to try and make it sustainable.
Love it. I love it. So I think we've kind of covered. I wanted to kind of get into what's coming next. It sounds like we've hit a lot of that. Is there anything else about T we should know? I mean, I know there is some capability that's at the command line with Magic that gives more power to users. Do you want to dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Like T-Clee, the package manager, the one that people are used to, it's great. The magic that we put into it means that you don't think about installation and you don't worry about whether or not you got the right version of things installed. If you type the command, it just installs it and then runs the command. So you could type node and then a script. If it's not installed, T installs node and then runs the script. And inside that script, it could specify exactly what version of node it needs because, we're developers. We need specific versions of things, not arbitrary, whatever brew happens to have today versions of things. And T can install multiple versions of everything. It's a version manager for everything, not just the latest or greatest. And you no longer need to have a version manager for Ruby and Node and NPM and all the others installed. You can just get on with it.
Love that.
It's a really, I think it is kind of like the peak what a package manager can be at the terminal layer. And then, most of the other cool things that we got coming are in the GUI. We have a super interesting set of ideas coming later this year. Well, I won't spoil, but essentially tapping into what open source is fundamentally and trying to build a kind of new kind of marketplace on top of that.
That's awesome.
And we just this weekend released liquidity, which essentially makes package management a library. So you can run a Node app and install anything using it. So if you need Postgres and Podman and whatever else you might need, you don't need TCLI, you don't need any other T software. It's just a Node package you can install, and then you can grab any other kind of software that you might need into there. I think that could be pretty interesting and powerful. We're using it internally for all of our products, so it just made sense to release it. And it also goes into the idea that I had, which was to make packaging a primitive. Like, shouldn't be tied behind a tool. And packaging should be something that's more flexible than that. So this is the first step there.
Nice, very nice. Well, okay, so before we wrap up, I know you've been diving in to AI a good amount. What are you playing with, and what are you excited about?
So one thing I really want to build, and I'm probably going to make it into a package, is something that can curate my Twitter feed and supplement that with reading Hacker News and then going into my email to check on all the newsletters I never read. So, probably using Auto GPT, but I don't know. Have you tried Auto GPT? It's a little difficult to control. So
No.
And I'd really love if I didn't have to use OpenAI for it, like GPT for all and things like that. We package those. I really want to be able to make it so that the model that these kinds of things use, as long as it's like the same kind of model, can be swapped in and out using T, because T can just like facilitate grabbing the different kinds and making sure that they're usable if the product can switch. So, I don't want it to cost me a fortune to run this thing, but yeah, like I am addicted to Twitter because I need the information it provides me. But there's so much crap I don't care about. So I just need like one of these LLMs, prompt it with, I only care about tech. I'm Max Howell, Google me. This is the kind of tech I'm interested in. Tell me what I need to read. And I might put that in the T store.
That's great. That's great. I love it. Chuck, you have anything else?
Oh, my head's already spinning. I've got a million questions, but not for today.
All right. All right. Well, Max, I really appreciate it. Everybody, go to t.xyz and download it and try it. I guarantee you it will make your life easier. It's really a joy to work with, and I'm having so much fun trying everything out. I just want more stuff now.
It's TEA, by the way.
I'm sorry, what did I say?
Well, no, you said T, but nobody, it could be TE.
Oh, that's a good point. TEA.xyz. There you go. I've been installing some apps while we're talking, letting people see how it functions and works. It's fantastic. So I really appreciate what you guys are doing, Max, and look forward to seeing what's coming next. And we'll get you back on once you guys are ready to launch on mainnet and you've got the steeping in place.
Absolutely. I would love to come back. And thanks very much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everybody, for participating and listening.